October 24th, Nintendo released community tournament guidelines. These were put into place to help individual organizers run community tournaments specifically to how Nintendo wants them operating. This day was considered Doomsday for the Mario Kart, Splatoon, and Super Smash Bros. Communities. These are the largest competitive scenes from games produced by Nintendo that have continuously grown through the years. There was a lot of fear the players, spectators, and tournament organizers had while reading these guidelines as they had to implement them into their very own online and in-person tournaments. Instead of reading them off though, giving you my opinion, I want to give you, the community, a sense of relief. Over the next 3 videos, I'll be interviewing 3 different tournament organizers that help run tournaments in the competitive scene both online and in person. Today's video, we'll be interviewing Magic8ball. Joining me on the call right now is Magic8ball, a TO and competitive player who's been around the scene for quite a while. They help a lot out with a lot of the LAN scenes and local scenes for events in the Splatoon competitive scene overall. Great friend of mine as well. And Magic, introduce yourself however else you'd like if I missed anything.
Hi, I'm Magic8ball. I am kind of a little bit of everything is how I describe myself. I am that Splatoon guy is another way that I've put it on Twitter. I do a little bit of everything. I used to do content. I do coaching. I do commentary. I do tournaments, and I play in tournaments. Yeah.
We're going to go right into these questions about these new Nintendo guidelines, just get your perspective of and how you feel about what this has, in a sense, caused, because as we've seen, the day one drop, Twitter pretty much fell apart.
Oh, yeah. I'll never forget the first thing that I saw in the morning, because I didn't even check Twitter first, because I've been trying to check Twitter less. I think that I checked Discord first. And I saw Popgun, who linked me a couple of tweets and everything, and he said to me, "Is this Doomsday?" And I thought, oh god. And granted, it was like 10 a.m. and I had to go to work.
Yeah.
I was reading, like I was just like scrolling through and like seeing what I was basically doom scrolling. Yeah. Is really what my first initial honest reaction was. And I remember getting to work and like messaging my boss and my coworker in the group chat and being like, guys, there's some stuff going down. I'm not going to be focused today, because I was legitimately like probably 1 or 2 steps away from basically a panic attack was my reaction.
Yeah. And
I was very concerned.
I was going to say, I feel like everybody felt that way as well, even like myself as a player standpoint, right? And like recently getting into the commentator scene myself almost a year ago, and like seeing how a lot of this stuff runs and works, like my heart dropped, because like me as well, I was in the middle of my shifts at work, and all I am seeing is my phone blow up from like Discord pings to Twitter notifs to like pretty much what felt like the Splatoon competitive doomsday of, hey, like of course everyone's initial reaction is we can't run tournaments anymore. And that's what the general consensus seemed, is that everyone was afraid that like your online tournaments are gone, your LANs are gone, your locals are gone. But I mean, I think it was just too much of an instant reaction to something that didn't need that much of a reaction.
And here's the thing. It was crafted to get that kind of reaction.
Yeah.
And this is something that I talked about a little bit more recently, a couple days afterwards. You know, if Nintendo didn't want that kind of reaction, they could have easily communicated beforehand. They have plenty of avenues to reach people. They've reached out to our commentators when they need them for events. They very much are hanging out in big Discords like IPL, like other important ones, like probably the Splatland server too.
Yeah.
They're there. They know where we are and where we could get the messages. Now, granted, this also could be one of those situations where those people in those Discords in the competitive scene or in like the marketing area were kind of blindsided by this. But like all in all, this did not have to be the way it played out.
Definitely.
Because it was a complete overwhelming of a it was not only overwhelming, it was just dense, it was vague, at times, and it was like all at once. It was definitely, to me, crafted to cause that kind of response of worry, of stress, of basically being scared and fearing for tournaments. Like, there's a reason that everyone felt that way, and I think that it was, I don't want to say intentional, but it was definitely there were steps that could have been had to prevent that reaction that weren't taken.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that they're there, right? They have a rep or someone that works for Nintendo, or at least helps run certain events, look at our events and look at what we can do and like where we are and how we're progressing forward with our events, right? And I think it was Wadsum who put out a tweet when he was invited to, I think it was one of the EU championships, or when he went to visit and spoke to a lot of production. And the stories that he was getting from them to what Nintendo released those guidelines was drastically different. The sheer shock of it. I know I have it pulled up somewhere so I can quote it. So yeah, Hussein spoke to a lot of people over at Nintendo the past couple months. They were super dedicated to push wonderful events to bring joy to players. So reading the document was a shock to him, and also definitely had to be a shock to many of the crew members that helped run Nintendo's events and also that helped run community events. So it's almost like there is a brief disconnect from the people they send to our events or to our communications with them to report back and forth that was lost somewhere along the way. Because I mean, at the same time, we all know this wasn't just affecting Splatoon, right? It hugely affected Smash. It also hugely affects the Mario Kart scene and any other, Nintendo events that take place that daily or weekly even.
And that's the thing too, is that what people probably don't realize a ton is that those people are kind of like, to give an example, and I had a great conversation with Gus about this, is they're basically upper management, right? Or they're middle management in most companies, right? Like, middle management is like close enough to the people on the ground, to the people that it affects, that they will, say good things about the company and try and like, ease the tension and everything, because they have to, because that is their job, because like they're in that position where they're in the good graces of both.
Yeah.
But in reality, do they actually have any kind of say, any kind of sway? Even the people who are from our community that are in contact with those people, do they realistically have any sway within the decisions being made across the sea in Japan? Really? Do they really have any say in what is going to happen to these tournaments? Do they realistically have any say in the decisions that are going to be made by the CEOs, by the C-suite, by even the heads of the Nintendo of America? Do they have any say? And that, honestly, no. As someone who works in a middle management position in my company, it's very hard. It's very hard to even put your opinion forward. And that's kind of what angle some of these people have been taking. Is that, like, they're pushing for us, they're gonna try and help us out, but what chance do they really have of making that happen? It is slim to none. And especially when there's so much larger context that they even might be missing out on, because they're so separated, because they're focused on their own jobs. They're not gonna be able to make important changes like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you put it best that way, because at the end of the day, and that's with all companies, not even just Nintendo or gaming companies in the world, right? Is that no matter how much of the lower positions can see the way the public reacts to a product or to an experience, to an event, anything across the board, the CEOs has the final say, regardless. And it could be like you go out of your way, say, yeah, the events are great, they're growing our scene, we're getting players that maybe never even played this game before buying our copies or buying our product, sharing the word of how great our product is. And then it's like, let's do the complete opposite and do something that unfortunately hurts the community in that way, because we don't like it running in a certain way, or don't like it doing something we don't want it to. And that thankfully, like, that kind of covered the first question as well. Pretty much
Yeah.
what was the reaction that you had and a lot of other people had in the TO world, in the production side, that a lot of competitive players and even spectators don't get to see, right? Because, you know, we come to these events and we just come to play. We come to hang out with the crowd. But, like, as someone who's gone to almost every major this year, you could see the production running back and forth to different things, whether it's to the TO table to find your next match, behind for the stream to make sure everything's working properly, to make sure the commentators are on time, set to go, and make sure things are repeatedly moving at a proper pace. You know, there's so much that players don't see because, I mean, again, they're there for one thing and one thing only, and that's to enjoy this event, like we all are. But that there's such a brief disconnect from the TOs to players sometimes that we don't really see the work that goes behind all of it. And now I feel like that is a little more known and was a little more brought to fruition because of these guidelines, right? Because now it's like, well, hold on, we got to see what the TOs say now. Like, they run our tournaments. This is when, if there was any time for everyone to shut up and not have a Twitter opinion, it's now. If there's any time.
Definitely. And it's kind of crazy, right? It's one thing that you know, sticks out in my mind about that entire day was the overwhelming outpouring of support for the organizers, for the people that run events, and that sincerely warmed my heart and was like just so awesome to see. Especially, like, you know, all the TOs coming together too. Like, it ended up being a really important and powerful thing, and it was really, really cool to see and felt very gratifying to be a part of.
Yeah.
But obviously in those first few hours it was just impending doom, but I think that the scene is really stronger for coming together like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think a lot of people feel like there's like certain headbutting, right, between certain organizations, IPL and Dapple. Of course, you have Ludi, and every other one under the sun. You have that sense of feeling like, you know, all these different orgs are running their different tournaments. Obviously, they all want the tournaments to do great, but it almost reassured that no matter what happens, we're all still here to support each other. We're all here to make sure all of our events in unison are working properly, functionally, no matter how big or small your organization might be, and what tournaments you run, during what times, at what places. And we even make sure that in the scheduling, right? That's something I think a lot of players miss when even like players like myself that make new tournaments, right? There are players out there that make a tournament for a day. There's so many schedules that take place, from SACs to low inks to paddling pools to proving grounds, squid junctions. I mean, so many tournaments under the sun that finding a window to have a one-off funny tournament, whatever it is, right? Even like one of those gimmick tournaments, you gotta not step on toes. And I think that's something a lot of players miss, is that all these organizations know each other's schedules. They know it, and there's always a backroom communication, because it's like, if they want to run a huge event, let's not forget when IPL ran that state versus state tournament. It had to be sure it wasn't on a day that, one, didn't run over one of their other tournaments, but two, didn't step on the toes of any other organization to take away from their tournaments.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it was great to see. I think it kind of helped the community understand that no matter what, like, there is communication, and there is no matter what happens, there in desperate times, we all can come together and I don't want to say and then save the day, but, you know, make sure things are working as they should, no matter what gets thrown out on our way.
Yeah, it's weird, but you know, I do see the TOs in this situation being kind of like I guess the best way to put it is like a shield. You know, we're kind of trying to be that front line here. That's definitely what it feels like, because I mean, I'm not gonna hold back anything. There is a realistic chance. I think it's slim. My personal hunch is that it's slim, but there is a chance that Nintendo does start taking down community tournaments. That is just a very real possibility that we have to contend with now that they've laid out the ground rules.
Yeah.
And it's basically random chance which one's going to be taking the first bullet.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to bring up, and I'm glad you said that, because the whole point, of course, of this interview overall and the videos, and of course, the understanding of these guidelines is understanding the consequences that could come out of it, right? These guidelines are guidelines, right? They're to make sure we run it under Nintendo standards, whether that's getting a license, whether that's making sure our community tournaments are either nonprofit, can't have certain sponsorships, can only have a limit of how many players can play in it without needing one of those licenses. And in a sense, it feels like a micromanage by Nintendo, which other gaming industries have done it before. It's not the first. It's just the caliber that Nintendo has, in a sense, limited us is different than what we've seen for maybe Rocket League or CSGO or any other video game out there.
There's a lot that I have to say about this entire topic. The first thing I want to say is that since 2013, anyone who's been running Nintendo tournaments knows that any tournament that they run was not exactly favored by Nintendo. Like every single tournament that we all have run, every single tournament in some way, except for like the most mundane basic of tournaments, every single tournament that somebody has run in the past 10 years is not falling in line with these guidelines.
Yeah.
But everybody who knew their stuff, who knew the history of things like Melee, understood that. They understood this is a blind eye agreement. Nintendo turns a blind eye to us. We turn a blind eye to Nintendo. We keep giving them good PR. They keep letting us run our tournaments. We keep like maintaining the ecosystem of their communities, and giving the more competitive people a place to stomp around, and they get more sales and more monthly players and better numbers for themselves. It was a blind eye agreement. It was a under the table handshake. It was an unspoken agreement that we had. These guidelines break that completely. They break that long-standing agreement that no, we're good to do what we want. That's really the severity of this whole situation, is that now Nintendo is basically saying like, no, we need to start doing this our way. And like you said, it's not like this is unheard of. In fact, Nine and I talked a little bit, and he was like, what are some of the Valorant guidelines? And we looked at them together, because I at my company Nerd Street, I work with a bunch of people who are familiar with other tournaments guidelines and things like that. So I asked one of my coworkers and said, hey, can you give me like some information on that? And she gave me like a whole like chart, and her and I had a conversation about it. Riot's restrictions on community events are actually like almost 1-to-1 with Nintendo's, except for things like registration caps, and I think like maybe entry fees and stuff like that. But like for the most part, like it's pretty consistent. Like they don't want people making like a lot of money without having some sort of communication with them.
Yeah.
But then my coworker and I were talking, and she was like, yeah, and obviously you have to like talk with Riot and stuff, but I would be a lot more like approachable to Riot. I would very much more easily approach Riot and see what agreement we can work out, as opposed to Nintendo, right? And so that's the main issue here, is that there's just such a I don't want to even say stigma, but just a history of misunderstandings and like misallocations towards like what tournaments are supposed to be, what esports as a whole can do for a community given by Nintendo. And because of that misunderstanding, of that disconnect, that is what people who are in the esports industry are scared of.
Yeah, I think that puts it great. And at the same time, like if you think about it, right, Nintendo is, if not the largest video game company there is to date in the world. They have so many titles that cross billions and billions of dollars yearly, because of how great of a game they make or of a series they create. So, because of they have that large status, and because they have thousands of employees across the world for all different. I mean, of course, Nintendo of Japan, Nintendo of NA, Nintendo of EU, of AU. I mean, there's so many different ways to, in a sense, try to find a contact. There's almost too many because you don't know who the right contact is going to be. Like, you can contact somebody that may come out to Nintendo, and you can have a great conversation with them, and how, moving forward, some kind of connection that can be made to improve our scenes, or in a sense have a better, like you said, understanding or agreement when how some of these events are ran, or maybe even, obviously, like, one of the biggest things they put in there was nonprofits. If there is any profit to be had that's not going into an event the following year or later in that year, could somehow be reached to them. But with how large they are and how many employees there are and how hard it is probably to even just get the simplest word up higher up that ladder, it's so much more of a challenge.
Let's dig into the weeds of the guidelines, because I really want to put a focus on this.
Absolutely.
What are the consequences, right? Like, who do we realistically think stands the most risk here? And obviously, it's going to be. So here are things. Here's the behind the scenes look, right?
Yeah.
Locals, like just those small little community meetups, those gatherings, those little tournaments in a coffee shop somewhere in like a very back end part of Chicago, where we go to Mana Gaming Cafe and 16 of us get together and play Splatoon. No, they're never gonna go in and try and shut that down. It's too little notice. It's too unimpressive. It would cause way too much of a stink. And at the end of the day, like, that's not what they're trying to go against here, right? Like, people aren't going to be making money from that. People aren't going to be, misconstruing Nintendo's IP that way. At least not in a big enough way for it to make an impact. So locals, as a whole, as long as they, like, don't have something like Splatoon in the name, they're fine. They're gonna be quite all right. They're really, like, they're fine. Unless, of course, they start to get bigger. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But let's go to the other side. Major lands. Most of the majors, quote unquote majors, that happen yearly, Genesis now, but LTC, Riptide, Big House if you want to count that. Those tournaments are tied to Smash events. These big Smash events, again, understand the history and have gone through their own trials and tribulations, especially with Panda Cup and Smash World Tour back in 2021. So they have already had contacts with Nintendo in order to get these licenses that they're talking about. And not only just the ones that we've seen, the community Japanese TOs get, we're talking about like marketing, revenue, like proper organization, like for-profit organizations licenses.
Yeah.
They're fine. They are going to figure it out. I have the utmost confidence in these TOs to not only work around Nintendo, but work with Nintendo when they have to, and only when they have to, in order to make these events happen. And that is I've spoken to multiple of them at this point. That is the confidence that they have given me, is that they're good. Like they're most likely not going to be effective. That would cause so much of an uproar.
Yeah.
If Nintendo started going in and shutting down events again, just like they did with EVO 2013, right? And
yeah.
Where they had so much negative backlash. Although it's questionable if we can get them to back down like that again. But there was just so much negative backlash because they shut down the tournament, completely shut it down, right? I mean, look at a Big House Free Melee, right?
Yes.
So much negative PR, so much backlash. If they go in and do that again, like, they're risking a lot. That is way too risky. So, let's talk about Metro Inc. Because I think this is really realistically where they're trying to aim their sights, their gun sights. Metro Inc. is now reaching those thresholds. They're reaching higher player numbers, where they're looking at getting bigger venues. They're having a lot more costs associated with it, and they're also trying to pay their production companies, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to pay their production companies. They're trying to pay their TOs. They're honestly, they can't go into the negative here. Like, sure, they're not going to be making like oodles of money, but they're going to need to charge people to try and cover their costs, and then make a little bit of something on top of that, right? They're trying to have vendors in the venue sell things. They're trying to have like these streams that will bring in a little bit of additional revenue. They're trying to make this, they're trying to make it happen, and they have the tools and the audience and everything to make that happen. But because they're going from that local that was kind of smaller, that, you know, only had a few teams, to now getting those larger numbers that are pushing the thresholds, paying out prize pools that might be pushing the thresholds, being able to make a profit off of those fees. And they're being very public about it, and it's a very well-known entity in our community.
Yeah.
They probably have the first target on their back, which is an awful thing for me to say. And I think that Andy and both of them, Andy and Pico and all of them, know this.
Yeah.
They are what Nintendo might be looking to at least put a hold on.
Yeah. I mean,
which is very scary.
Absolutely. And like, we look at the numbers, right? And for those of you who maybe aren't aware of Metro Inc., it is now the New York's Splatoon scene that has been rapidly growing, as Magic said. I mean, when the first Big Dapple was announced, we had just a handful of teams sign up and go. And as someone who's been to both the previous Big Dapples and Gridlock, every time I've went, we've gotten bigger and bigger. And just now, Big Dapple 3, which is, I'm not sure if it'll be happening already by the time this video comes out, but we reached the team cap within the first week of this tournament being announced. We reached it so fast that they had to turn teams down from signing up and having a handful be put on standby because of how quickly we reached that team cap, which is mind-boggling to me, because just a couple months ago, this tournament was barely reaching their team cap as it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes to show how many players there are in the scene around that New York area. And I can't feel like I just had to say this, but I feel like we're repeating history, right? Because Melee, for take an example, years ago used to, you know, get passed under the sun and wasn't as massive as it is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at somewhere along the way, it started at one point where it just got bigger and bigger and just kept growing to where it snowballed to this massive, massive community with tons of tournaments, tons of, you know, coffee shop playrooms, someone's basement where people will come out for a couple matches, and then we have these bigger locals, and now these majors, like you mentioned, the Riptides, the LTCs, the Big Houses, the Genesises, the rest in peace Evos, like,
yeah,
we had these events now that are just breaking record numbers, and unfortunately, Metro Inc. is being looked at first because New York is a massive scene for things to grow. That's the beauty of the big city, right? Is that the littlest thing could take off, and if it's gonna grow and you know, be massive anywhere, it's New York. And unfortunately, it's growing such at a rapid pace, and the production has to get larger, the rooms have to get larger, the player base is gonna obviously continuously getting larger, that we're gonna have to start outsourcing for our own gaming chairs, our own tables, our own setups, our own projections, you name it. Pretty much, in a sense, almost act and turn this into a mini major, if you want to call it that, for a local scene that's unfortunately breaking numbers that are getting larger than a local, which is scary.
What it's gonna come down to is Nintendo going to let these tournaments grow past that? At the end of the day, Nintendo has the decision to let these tournaments grow or not. Currently, what we're seeing right now is that they want to halt the growth of these events that could potentially snowball into something bigger. That is what they're aiming to do. And it's very fortunate that we have the connection to the Smash scene that we do, so that we can kind of hide behind them and grow in the background. But for any TOs that really want to make a difference, make these larger events, and run these tournaments on their own, that don't have that pre-established connection with Nintendo, that don't have the years of history of understanding what to do in situations like this, they're at risk of being, confronted by Nintendo. And that's such a damning thing. It's such a damning thing because this is how Melee grew, right? Like sure, they fell into the Dark Ages back in 2007, and from 2007 to end of 2007, 2008 to 2012, they had the Dark Ages where they were playing in those smaller venues, in those basements and back alleys and all that jazz. And then it grew, and Nintendo didn't stop them until it was too late. They're trying to stop anything else from getting that big before it's too late. So it's very fortunate that we have the connections that we do. So at the end of the day, things aren't going to change too much, except for the people that want to start going out on their own. And it's unfortunate because I really thought that the way forward for our scene was that avenue, was the Metro Inks of going, oh, we can do our own thing. We're getting to that point where we can have our own events. That might not be the best way forward anymore, and it definitely changes things.
You can't help but feel, were we repeating Smash history, right? Because like you said, Nintendo saw what Smash did, and I think for a while they were okay to an extent with the size that Smash got because they grew so quickly, because they got out of control before there was control that they could have. But now they have a steady standpoint, and if you think about it, more eyes on the communities that are building around their games. And seeing the numbers that Splatoon was kind of bringing in, the tournaments that were being had, the LANs, the locals, I mean, even the community overall, I mean, just how large this game has gotten over the past, over a year. Splatoon 3 has been out, the past handful of years that Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2 have been out. I mean, we were growing at a pace that was probably matching the Smash scene, and Nintendo didn't want to lose control again. They lost it once. They were not going to let it happen again to another series that they own, another franchise that they own. Yeah, and all this just spurred in my mind right now as you were talking, because it really feels that way and it looks that way, because we were in a sense becoming the next community that runs off a Nintendo game that was hitting record-breaking numbers.
We really it's crazy to me, but I haven't even. I put out a chart, I think before LTC 2022 or 2023, and with just the escalation of LANs and attendance over time, and we took a hit during COVID, obviously, but this game has been growing as a competitive scene and has not stopped. I mean, look at low ink entrance numbers. They're at an all-time high. Even a full year after the game's release, we are still going up. That's insane. Yeah. That's crazy. Are we going to see the same amount of explosion over time as we saw with Splatoon 2? Who knows? There's a lot to be seen yet. Now, the other important factor that I want to talk about, and this is something that specific that players like Jackpot were worried about, and only Jackpot were worried about, is what's going to happen to sponsors.
Yeah.
And I mean, as sorry as I am to say this, nothing's really changed.
I was gonna say, I forget who the player was that put it. I believe it was someone from Red Sun, potentially. For those who don't know, Red Sun is another very popular upcoming top level Splatoon team. that in a sense broke down, and a lot of players did it, mind you. I know that one of the Red Suns players was the first I saw that appeared on my timeline that broke down the whole sponsorship deal. Because obviously that was a major issue that we looked at, because you couldn't have sponsorship for events. But when it came to team sponsorships, it almost was like grazed over.
Yeah, it was very vague.
Like
very, very vague.
It was so vague to a point where I think it's thinking of it as a sponsorship point of view, right? How vague that was is scary. Because do you take that risk and sponsor a team to go to these events, to fly them out, or, you know, get them a room, whatever it might be, in hopes they place very well in this event, but then potentially be approached by Nintendo with something? Some kind of lawsuit, some kind of DMCA, some kind of like, hey, you need to back down or else. Like, you know, and I think, I don't want to say the vagueness was on purpose, but you can't help but feel it gives that sense of like, you're on thin ice if you do it.
And again, this is the other piece of context that I haven't really brought up yet, is that Nintendo thinks that esports equals gambling. And it is irrational. Like, we can draw the lines however we like. From our perspective, it is complete and utter doggy doo-doo. But that is how they think.
Yeah.
They think that people should not be making significant money off of this. It's too random. It's too unpredictable. It's not a true expression of skill. It's not a true sport. However people want to think about it. That is what they think. So they're trying to limit the amount of money that is involved. And that's part of it. Part of it is sponsors. Part of it's sponsorships. And now, another important thing that we have to talk about is that there was a tournament that we just commentated yesterday together.
Yes.
Us two. From Azurite Productions, Tropical Throwdown. And they're working with a couple sponsors, one of them being Garden State Esports, who is, you know, a nonprofit who is all about like educators and events in the Northeast. And they wanted to sponsor and give help towards a prize pool and help pay staff and on-air talent. And like, it's something that I have been championing for so long. I was like, this is the way that we need to start working, right? Because we're not gonna get these giant Papa John sponsorships that we had for LTC 2022.
Yeah.
We're not gonna get that. That is not our market. What we need are smaller gaming adjacent or like very niche esports companies and reach out to them. And this is something I've talked to IPL about a bunch of times. We need to reach out to them and say, hey, we want to help promote you. We've got a lot of people here in this very cool niche growing esport that you could market to. How is about giving us some money so that you can market? And Azurite Productions did that. And we had an awesome event. The production looks great. We had a lot of people making it a fantastic viewing experience and playing experience. And Nintendo was trying to actively shut that stuff down. It's so unfortunate. And I wish that we had all taken a better chance towards that step before this entire thing blew up. But I'm glad that they did. They're just gonna have to be very careful now.
Yeah, and it's pretty much like a minefield, right? I feel it's a good way to put it. It's pretty much a minefield of what any kind of deals or sponsorships you try to get to just, whether it's help run an event, whether it's, you know, get, you know, nonprofit people paid. I mean, you name it. It's gonna be dancing around guidelines. It's gonna be dancing around Nintendo, and it's gonna be a scary dance for sure.
Now, the one thing that we have going for us is that most, if not all, of our events are free to enter, especially online.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, really, what Nintendo probably thinks is that, like, oh, these people are paying money towards these people who are making a profit
Yeah.
off of, like, this tournament, right? with these entry fees. That's probably one of their main concerns, and that is the one buffer that we have going towards us. And when we talked with the head TO for Riptide, Aaron, that was one of his main things to tell us, was that like, you guys have this buffer, like, because you're not like making people pay to Nintendo. It doesn't look like, because like all these online Smash tournaments and stuff, Nintendo probably looks at it and they're like, wow, I can't believe they're extorting our player base. But with us, we don't have that. So we have that buffer. We have that, like, oh, wait a minute, maybe they are the good, maybe they aren't so bad, and we don't have to go after them as harsh. That is the one thing that we have going for us. And so, you know, you have a question here. When it comes to applying for the license, is that something we're going to do, or discuss who is going to be those applicants? Like, no. And this is something that I don't know exactly who I don't remember who exactly I told it to, or where I wrote it down, but if we apply for a license.
And for those who aren't aware, maybe haven't fully read the guidelines yet, any tournaments exceeding a certain amount of players entrants, I believe it's 200 in online, 300 in person, or I have it flipped around, it might be 200 in person, 300 online. You must apply for a license to have your tournament ran, following a handful of other guidelines to match with that.
So Nintendo needs ammunition. The more they know, the more we give them an in, the more they can shut things down and do as they please and gain complete stranglehold on events. And at the end of the day, they may be able to shut down streams, but even their legal team has a limit. And are they really willing to shut down a large number of events? It's kind of like they're going to keep doing their thing. See if Nintendo starts to pick them off one at a time. It's going to be random where they'll target down first, if at all. But this is mainly a scare tactic and a restriction for smaller events to suddenly get bigger and blow up out of nowhere. It's not that licenses are playing by a different set of rules. They're getting an okay to bend them. And if Nintendo thinks they're bending too much, they're just going to get stopped at the door. Yeah. And now the information for the event is in Nintendo's hands, and they know exactly where to send their legal paperwork for shutting down your event, even if you want to run it anyways. So really, this entire situation is just Nintendo baiting people to admit that their events do not follow protocol, are kind of not in line with what they want. Yeah. Because luckily, most of us have very good internet privacy standards, right? And we're all very, like, behind closed doors. We are very private. We don't show our public selves. We don't show our IRL selves. We're very, very much shield our private information. Yep. So where are they going to send the paperwork? Where are they going to send, do they know where these events are going to be? Like these locals, or even these like mildly bigger events? Do they know exactly who they need to talk to? Right? And like, the more that we give them, the more they have a chance to shut us down. And the more that in the future they can shut us down. So our strategy is to not apply. Let them make the first move. Let them come to us.
I like that you mentioned that, because one of the questions I did have was going to be, like, what are the changes that we, if any at all, that are we going to see, both TO side and player side and spectator side, of these LANs and tournaments being ran? And from what I'm getting, nothing. We're not changing a thing, which I think is great to hear, for one, right? For of course, the competitive side, the player side, that's awesome to hear. For two, for the spectator side, that's awesome. We can go to these events, we can view the streams, we can see what these players are doing. But also from the TO side, it's sure, like, you have your guidelines, you have your licenses. That's great. We're gonna run our event, and if you think it's a problem, come to the door.
Yeah, like, they can throw around these guidelines all they want, but we want to keep doing our own thing. We have a good thing going here, and you can either be a part of it, or we can start battling back and forth. And that's realistically what we're going to be doing, right?
Yeah.
The other main culprit for who might get targeted is probably the CCA, the Collegiate Cephalopod Association, the people who run the collegiate events, because they have an MSI sponsorship, and they have, like 100 teams in their most recent league. so not only are they breaking, the sponsorship guideline, they're breaking the entrant guideline, and and then there's the question about like, oh well, can we let these players in if they're sponsored by an entity such as a university, right? Because there was something there about universities too, like they're really kind of pushing up against that envelope, and it's so unfortunate, but we worked so hard to get to this point. We have to try and stand our ground and make sure that we can keep doing things the way that we want to do, so that we could share it in the best way possible.
Yeah, and you can't help but think that, I mean, we've seen the college scene grow significantly. It has gotten so large to a point where Nintendo themselves at the recent NA Championship started off the stream with a college tournament or college match.
I think it was high school. Was it high school?
Was it high school or college?
I think it was a high school match because of their Play VS League.
Okay, so I mean that even furthers the point that lower like the education system is included, and Nintendo sees it and they want that because it shows that esports is still in a sense becoming a thing that college kids can go to, or kids in high school or middle school can start playing now, and when they reach college level, they could get a sponsorship for, or they could get I don't want to say a degree for, but they could
like make a career.
Yes, they can make a career out of playing this game of you're a kid, you're a squid now. Which is so funny to say, but it's so true. And I mean, you never saw that with Smash Bros. You never saw that with Mario Kart. But Splatoon, you started off that stream with, we're looking at these high school teams, they're going to compete, and the winner gets the little trophy and some great recognition, which is incredible, and that's something we haven't seen really yet, I feel, with a game that Nintendo has produced, right?
It's just sad. Yeah. It really is.
It's a battle it's pretty much, I made that meme, and I'm gonna put it up on Twitter.
Yeah.
The Avengers of the IP of the Splatoon community coming together, in a sense, going to war with Nintendo, and that's pretty much how it feels now. It is a who's gonna make the first move. From what we've gathered here from you today, and of course I think we've gathered from a lot of TOs, just online and in servers and in help desks, is we're not gonna budge. We're not gonna make a move. So now we're, in a sense, putting the ball back in Nintendo's court. Yes, you threw guidelines at us, and that's great, but now it's back to you. Enforce it, because we're not going to exactly apply. Not to saying we're like super rebelling. Of course, if Nintendo comes knocking, we're gonna answer to a degree. Like, you kind of have to, but they have to make the first knock.
They do. They have to come to the table. Yeah. Basically, like, what I'm really treating this, right, is, inspired by things like the strikes that we've been seeing over the summer for the UAW and for SAG-AFTRA and for the Writers Guild of America. Like, they need to come to the table.
Yeah.
They need to meet our demands. We are the players. At the end of the day, we could very easily completely boycott the Nintendo events.
Yeah.
We could just very easily do that. And the one thing that I want to say to people is to prepare for that. Is to basically prepare a campaign completely against any and all Nintendo tournaments. Don't watch the streams. Don't enter the tournaments. Don't even go near them, and try and stop people from signing up for those tournaments. Just completely flood them with bad PR. That is, if there's one thing that people can do in the future, it is going to be that. Is if they start shutting down our events, we start shutting down their events. We do not give them anything. And I'm going to legitimately, I personally will go to top players and talk with them about it and make sure that they understand that if they want our events to keep going the way that we want it, they need to stop giving Nintendo any room.
I mean, can you imagine the presence that we could have? Like, let's say, like, the crazy sentence I'm about to say, and thinking it is wild, but could you imagine 2024, Nintendo shut down XYZ event. The Splatoon World Championships canceled due to players being unavailable to go. Quote unquote being unavailable.
Yeah, how about that?
That would be insane.
That'd be insane. That would legitimately be insane. But I think that Jackpot is already at their wits' end.
Yeah.
Right? You know, at this point, they don't have anything left to lose. I would hope, I would think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, it all it takes is the communication to these other countries, with the other top teams that have succeeded and won their country's championship, that have been invited to this world championship, to say, no, Nintendo, I'm not going to come to your world championship. Thank you for the games, thank you for the tournament. I know we won for our country, but we will not be competing in Worlds. We will be staying home, and instead we will be playing an online tournament happening the same day.
Now, again, that would be a very drastic step that I would never call for unless it was absolutely necessary to keep our scene from dying.
100%.
But again, it's one of those things where, like, we have to start thinking about this because it is a possibility.
It's a real world we live in that we didn't have to before.
Mm-hmm.
And tossing it back to, like, obviously our last questions we have, this is kind of on the same topic already, is the fear that these players have had and the viewers have had of what's going to happen to my tournament. Am I going to be able to play? Am I going to be able to break into mid-level? Am I going to be able to get that low ink ban? Will Popgun DM me saying I am no longer allowed to play? Should players have this fear anymore? And if so, how much should they fear that their favorite low ink is going to get canceled? That their Big Dapple or their I know there's a LAN in the EU happening soon.
Breeze.
Should they fear that Breeze is going to get shut down? Like, should they have this fear? If so, how much should they fear that this online or in-person events will get shut down?
I'm gonna get a little, I don't know about deep or poetic or whatever, but I'm gonna say some words. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the recognition of fear and acting in spite of it. And I want everyone listening to this to, I don't want to say let the spite fuel them, but pretty much, right? Like, we don't have to act out of fear. Yes, it is scary. Yes, there's very real possibilities of events getting shut down, and there's a very uncertain future ahead of us. But we don't have to act upon those emotions. Instead, we can come together. You know, we can help each other work through our fears. We can become a stronger community together if we act and help one another and help push each other to go up against this, to prevent things from happening. There are steps that we can take to prevent our scene from getting shut down. And obviously, some people are going to have a better idea of that than others. So be open, have your ears open, continue paying attention to what people are saying, continue being open-minded about future ideas. If things really come down to these crazy scenarios that nobody wants in their worst nightmares, there are things that we can do in spite of that. And I just want people to have that in the back of their minds, that there is hope no matter what. There is always a future. There's always a better place that we can get to as long as we keep working together, as long as we stay as a united front as we have. And so the last thing I really want to say is thank you for showing your support, for speaking your mind, for listening to others, talking to others, and really not only strengthening the bonds of our community, but standing to help uplift this community. Thank you.
Magic could have not said it any better than what he had just put out on the table. Thank you so much, Magic, for coming out for this interview. And again, we got pretty much all these things that the players may have feared for, and then we have a great open insight thanks to you on the side of lands and locals and just events overall. In a sense, I think this was a great reassurance for the player base to not have this fear or this scare anymore, that just because they lay down the hammer, it doesn't mean we can't answer back bigger. The last thing I do want to say is, for all the people that may be watching who don't know who you are, where can they find you if they want to see more about you and your journey and what you do in the scene of Splatoon?
I am on BlueSky at Magic8ball, BlueSky.social, or whatever the normal handle is, because I am a goated, and I beat the trademark Magic8ball company to the punch, and they're probably going to want that back at some point, but I'm not going to let them have it. You can find me on x.com at magic_octo. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it.
Once again, huge shout out and thank you, Magic, for coming out, doing this interview, and giving a silver lining and a light and hope to what felt like the doomsday of Splatoon for so many of the community. That's going to do it for this video. As I mentioned, this is one of 3 different interviews I had with tournament organizers. If there are any questions or concerns that you might have, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll be more than happy to try to give you an answer if there is one available for anything you might be worried about that wasn't clear in either these interviews or in the guidelines. See you in the next video.